During a flight, a young executive refused to give up his seat in first class to an elderly woman who became ill on the plane. The next day, as he entered his boss's office, he was paralyzed to see the elderly woman again. James, a young executive brimming with ambition, was noticeably anxious as he waited in line to board his flight. With a laptop in hand, he planned to use every minute in the air to advance his professional projects. His choice of first class was no accident. It was a strategy thought out to maximize productivity with the least possible interruptions. As the boarding line slowly dragged on, James's stress progressively increased. Every 3 minutes, an impatient glance at his watch and an audible grumble revealed his growing impatience. The anxiety was palpable in his gestures and expressions, reflecting how much he valued every second of his time. At one point, when the progression of the line paused momentarily, James could not contain his frustration. With a raised tone and clearly annoyed, he questioned the attendant, eliciting curious looks from other passengers. "Excuse me, do premium passengers also have to wait in line?" His question not only expressed his discontent, but also highlighted his expectation of preferential treatment. Finally on board, James quickly headed to his seat in first class, avoiding any eye contact with other passengers and the crew. He settled into the spacious seat, stretched his legs, and began to enjoy the privileges he believed he deserved. Shortly after takeoff, while James was intensely dedicated to working on his laptop, the flight was hit by turbulence. While some passengers showed fear and restlessness, he tried to remain focused, unperturbed by the aircraft's jolts. Persistent, he continued his task, taking advantage of the momentary calm that followed to savor a glass of champagne while resuming his analysis on a crucial business spreadsheet. The trip, besides being a work opportunity, symbolized for James the chance to rise to the lifestyle he so aspired to. However, his concentration was abruptly interrupted by the approach of a flight attendant who brought with her an elderly lady, visibly debilitated by the turbulence. With a look of concern, the attendant explained that the lady was having some respiratory problems and asked James to give up his place so that the elderly woman could recover more comfortably. James's response was immediate and firm, reflecting his reluctance to give up the comfort and tranquility he so cherished. No, that's not right. I paid a lot for this seat and I need to work. I won't be able to concentrate with other people next to me. What if a child starts screaming?" The tension in the air was palpable as the elderly woman struggling leaned on the seat next to him. James hesitated for a brief moment as he considered pushing her arm away, but chose not to make physical contact. The flight attendant, deeply concerned about the health of an elderly passenger, questioned James again, requesting his cooperation to switch seats with the lady. She explained in a gentle voice that this change would not only provide comfort, but could be crucial for the passenger's well-being during the flight. "It might just be for a few minutes, until she feels better," she insisted, hopeful in her voice. However, James was unmoved. Seated in his leather seat, he looked directly at the flight attendant with a look of discontent and raised a finger as if to punctuate his resistance. "Why me?" he asked in a voice of frustration. "There are other people in first class. Do you know how much my working hour costs?" His question was more a statement of his own importance than a true inquiry. "I can't lose even a minute. Please see if other passengers want to swap places with the elderly lady, because I won't compromise my productivity." Meanwhile, across the aisle, a middle-aged man watched the scene with a concerned look. Touched by the situation, he promptly stood up and, with a calm and respectful voice, offered his seat to the lady. "Please take my place. It would be a pleasure to help you," he said with a welcoming smile. The elderly woman, visibly moved and grateful, accepted the offer with a smile that brightened her tired face, settling into the new seat with a sigh of relief. James, for his part, barely registered the exchange. He rolled his eyes, a clear gesture of disdain, and turned back to his notebook. The frenetic clicking of his keyboard echoed through the silence of the airplane as he dedicated himself to completing a business spreadsheet for his boss. Completely absorbed in his task, he ignored the majestic clouds gliding by outside, symbolizing his disconnection not just with the natural environment, but also with the human one around him. As the plane descended into the airport, James was full of doubts about the ongoing negotiation with the company's partners. Why won't they agree? Maybe they aren't as smart as they think, he murmured in frustration as he turned off his computer and gathered his belongings. As he disembarked, the airport corridor seemed endless. Laden with anxiety, James spotted Michael, his boss, waiting. A wave of panic flooded him, making his heart race and his forehead sweat coldly. What is he doing here? He thought, fearing that one of the partners had complained about his spreadsheet or his conduct on the flight. His steps were heavy and slow as he approached, imagining the worst. However, as he got closer, he noticed that Michael was not looking at him, but at someone behind him. Turning around, James saw, to his surprise, the same elderly lady who had needed help on the plane. She walked toward them with a slow but steady pace, her face now serene and smiling. Michael advanced with firm steps toward the woman, opening his arms and enveloping her in a warm and protective hug. Meanwhile, James watched the scene with a mix of surprise and confusion. He would never have expected to see his boss showing such affection, especially in public. His astonishment grew even more when he heard Michael call the lady Mom. The words echoed in his mind, heavy as lead, making James feel a sudden discomfort, as if he had swallowed an ice cube. All he wanted at that moment was to become invisible, disappear from there. However, his attempt to withdraw was interrupted when Michael, with a friendly gesture, motioned for him to come closer. The lady, now recovered from her earlier discomfort and displaying a commanding and resolute posture, seemed revitalized, though she still showed signs of fatigue on her face. Michael, enthusiastic, tried to introduce James to his mother, but she, visibly uninterested in new interactions, clearly expressed her desire to just go home. Michael seemed not to understand his mother's reserve, but chose not to question her coldness at that moment, attributing it to accumulated fatigue. For James, this brief moment of tension seemed to dissipate quickly. He offered a sheepish wave goodbye and walked away from the spot, breathing deeply, relieved to distance himself from the uncomfortable situation and hoping such an encounter with his boss's mother would not repeat. That night, lying in his bed, James was surprised by the vibration of his cell phone. It was a voicemail from Michael, apologizing for disturbing him at that hour, but mentioning that the business partners had still not signed the contract. Despite the seriousness of the matter, James felt relieved to realize that the message made no reference to Michael's mother. The challenges of the negotiation, which until then seemed so grave, now appeared minor compared to his fear of jeopardizing his relationship with his boss. In his response, James shared his frustration with the partner's stubbornness and reaffirmed his conviction in the success of the deal. Michael, in turn, advised James to keep calm, emphasizing the importance of the deal for the future of the office and for everyone's professional growth. The next morning, as James walked into Michael's office, he was faced once again with Mary, the lady who had become ill on the plane. The tension immediately returned. What was she doing there so early? Before he could form a question, Michael's voice filled the room, vibrant and enthusiastic. He introduced his mother as a born negotiator, a driving force behind the success of the company she and his late father had built. He then revealed that Mary would be the key expert to close the current deal. James, surprised and somewhat intimidated, realized that this morning would bring much more than he had expected. In the meeting room, as the tension mounted and the silence stretched, James struggled to maintain his composure. His voice slightly trembled as he answered Mary's incisive questions about the project. Each question felt like a sharp sword, questioning not just the details, but his competence as well. James then realized the seriousness with which Mary approached the business. The woman, with her experience and critical eye, did not let any detail pass, even those James had considered minor or even irrelevant. With a deep sigh, James tried to recompose himself. As he presented the financial points and expansion plans, Mary frequently interrupted him, pointing out discrepancies and requesting additional clarifications. With each interruption, she noted something in her notebook, not revealing whether her observations were criticisms or approvals. James felt the weight of every word he pronounced. While trying to explain each detail requested, he observed Michael, who maintained a serene expression, trusting in his mother's ability to evaluate the project. It was evident that Michael deeply respected Mary's judgment, and this only added more pressure on James. After a series of intense questions, Mary finally took a pause, leaving the air charged with the expectation of her evaluation. She looked directly at James, her penetrating eyes seeming to read his soul. Then, with a tone slightly softer but still authoritative, she began to discuss her impressions of the presentation. She pointed out areas that needed improvement, but also acknowledged the strengths. Surprisingly, she proposed some innovative strategies to overcome the identified obstacles, suggesting adjustments that could optimize the project's outcomes. During the meeting the following day, Mary detailed the plan she had in mind. She proposed a strategy involving significant adjustments to the way the presentation and business proposal were initially formulated by James. Although the method seemed unorthodox in his eyes, it was clear that Mary was seeking a more holistic and customer-centered approach. She emphasized the importance of demonstrating to the partners that the company not only understood their needs, but was willing to go beyond to accommodate them. James, still skeptical, internally questioned the viability of Mary's plan. His skepticism was fueled by the concern that Mary was planning something to get back at him for the incident on the plane, and that any misstep might not only cost the deal, but also his job. However, as Mary explained the details and the logic behind each aspect of the plan, humanity is a powerful currency in the business world, Mary explained, her eyes fixed on James. And often, it's exactly what's missing to close a significant deal. Mary's words resonated in James's mind, making him reflect on his own behavior and how his lack of empathy could have been detrimental in other situations. Resigned and somewhat humbled by Mary's wisdom, James agreed to follow the plan. He knew that regardless of his personal reservations, any resistance on his part could raise suspicions about his previous behavior on the plane and lead to losing his job. James was aware of the limitations he faced and knew that, should the plan fail, he could deflect the consequences by pointing to Mary as responsible. However, for him, failure was not an acceptable option. This negotiation project was a personal initiative that he had been developing for a long time, and he was not willing to see his efforts compromised by old resentments. Therefore, he decided to take charge of the situation. Determined to follow his own course, James deliberately chose to ignore Mary's suggestions, convinced that she was planning to undermine his strategies in search of revenge. He prepared meticulously, reviewing his presentation and financial projections. With everything ready, he requested that a meeting with the partners and company shareholders be scheduled for next Friday. During the meeting, although James was anxious, his determination was palpable. He presented his proposals vigorously, capturing the attention and gazes of everyone in the room. Mary's expression was a mix of surprise and disgust as she realized that James had completely discarded her ideas in favor of his own strategy. Michael, meanwhile, noticing the direction the meeting was taking, considered intervening, but realized that any interruption now would reflect negatively on his leadership and control. When Mary tried to correct some information presented by James, she was promptly interrupted. "With all due respect, Mrs. Mary, my analyses are correct, and I see no need for changes," James asserted confidently. Mary tried to argue again, but was silenced by him once more. The tension in the room escalated as the discussion progressed. The participants appeared confused and concerned about the clash between James and Mary. Michael, observing the arrogance of his employee, saw the situation deteriorating. At the end of the meeting, it was clear to the partners that the strategy proposed by James did not inspire confidence, and there were doubts about the viability of the plan. "I think we'll have to abandon this negotiation. We don't have time for a new plan. It's a shame, we were really counting on this deal," commented one of the main shareholders. James, desolate upon realizing the extent of the damage he had caused, knew he needed to justify himself to his boss. However, Michael was not willing to talk at that moment and asked James to use the weekend to reflect and rest. On Monday, when summoned to Michael's office, James felt the weight of the situation. The atmosphere was tense and he could barely control his nervousness. Michael handed him a paper. Upon reading the document, a printed email, James discovered, to his surprise and relief, that the proposal had been accepted and the big deal would be finalized. Relief and excitement overtook James, who stuttered as he tried to express himself. I knew it. I was right, wasn't I? I'm sorry, boss, but your mother tried to sabotage the deal. She tried, but I managed to save the company. Her ideas were completely outdated. I knew the partners would care about the numbers. Numbers don't lie." At the moment when James was celebrating his supposed victory, Mary discreetly announced her presence in the room where everything was unfolding. She had entered quietly and listened to James's words, who, confident and without any sign of embarrassment, smiled at her and reiterated the superiority of his business plan, suggesting that it wouldn't hurt her to admit it. However, tired of the young man's constant bravado, Mary did not hesitate to interrupt him. "I think you didn't read the email correctly, my young friend." Surprised, James picked up the document again and examined it more carefully. This time, he clearly saw that his original proposal had been rejected. However, through Mary's intervention, a second proposal had been presented and accepted. It was her intervention, not his, that had saved the business, a strategy that was well received by the partners and company shareholders. Faced with this revelation, James felt his self-confidence drain away, and his previous laughter turned into embarrassed silence. Michael observed everything in silence, reflecting on the delicate situation his employee had caused. After a moment, he spoke with austere calm. "I think you know what this means, don't you, James? You didn't follow the plan we had agreed upon, disregarding a direct order from me. Because of your inflated ego, we almost lost a very important contract. Unfortunately, I see no other option but to let you go from the company." Mary then added, without showing any resentment. You are entirely responsible for your dismissal, James. Before looking for a new job, maybe you should consider evolving as a person. Respecting others will only bring benefits to your personal and professional life. Confused, Michael tried to understand his mother's insinuation about the flight, but Mary, skillfully, changed the focus of the conversation to a joyful celebration of the business's success, suggesting that they go celebrate at a nice restaurant. Rising, Mary and Michael headed to the door, while James remained seated, head down, reflecting on his mistakes. Before leaving, Michael stopped in front of the employee and sincerely thanked him for the effort dedicated in the previous months. I hope our paths cross again in the future. When you're more mature, maybe we can work together again. I believe in second chances. My mother taught me that. Good luck. With these words, Michael left the room accompanied by Mary, leaving James alone with his thoughts, while in the distance, he heard the sounds of the team's celebrations, now relieved by the happy outcome of the deal. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.